Hello, I'm Dee, and welcome to Emmanuel's podcast on mental health called Minded, where we are spiritual minded in our discussions, community minded in our mission, and like minded in our hope in Christ. Thank you so much for joining us again. And today I have a special guest with me. Her name is Kayla. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to be a part of the podcast on today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do?
So I am Kayla, like you said. I'm from here, Delmar, Maryland. I work in Salisbury currently as a substance abuse counselor. Right now, I do work for an outpatient facility. I have a little bit of background in inpatient and rehab and detox center as well.
Okay, well, welcome to our podcast. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad that you found the time to be able to join us. And the reason why I wanted to have you on today was to talk about a subject that many times you might not hear too much about in the circle of church and
hmm
among believers or Christians, and that's the topic of addictions.
Yes.
And so we want this hopefully to be a safe place where people can gain information,
Yeah.
can gain insight, and just raise awareness about addictions and where people can get help.
hmm
So, again, thank you for joining us. And so, how long have you been working in addictions?
I have been working addictions going on 4 years now.
Okay. And you work at White Flint Recovery of the Eastern Shore?
Yes, White Flint Recovery Eastern Shore. It is in downtown Salisbury. We're the longest running outpatient facility actually on the Eastern Shore. We started out in Rockville, Maryland, but now Salisbury is our only location.
Okay.
So that's really exciting.
What are some of the services that you guys offer at White Flint Recovery?
So we offer outpatient and intensive outpatient services, and I also offer a DUI education course as well.
Okay. Now, even though White Flint is in Salisbury, Maryland,
Mhm.
there are other recovery centers, rehab centers that offer similar services.
Yes.
Okay. And we will be linking some of the uh, resources at the end of the podcast. So people that live outside of our broadcast area can still link into agencies that provide the
Yes.
IOP. Can you explain a little bit in case people might not know what is IOP?
So, IOP, intensive outpatient, there are different levels to addiction or substance abuse treatment. Usually starting in the highest level, which would be a rehab or detox facility. Generally, after that, we would like to see those clients or patients come to us after to kind of continue into recovery. Usually, detox centers are only, or rehabs are usually only 30 to 60 days, which is a pretty good jump start to getting people into some
Okay.
clean time, but definitely more support is better. So coming over to an intensive outpatient is a lower level of care because we're not with them all day
Okay. Okay.
24/7, but they are still in a structured program, which entails like group therapy, individual therapy, and things like that.
Great. And like I said, we'll link some of those national
Yeah.
resources at the end. So let's just start right off. How prevalent is addictions? I know a lot of times in the media and the news on social media, we hear about it, but really, how prevalent is it?
It's actually huge. I would say 1 in 10 Americans actually struggle with addiction right now.
Mhm.
I just don't think, it's talked about enough. Um, but usually I would say it either reaches someone that you know or maybe someone that they also know as well.
So the chances of me, the chances of you, the chances of some of our listeners coming in contact with someone that has addiction or a history of
hmm
addictions is pretty strong.
Yeah,
So this is not something, this is something that we're talking about that is felt far reaching, not
absolutely.
something that is like, oh, every now and then you might come in contact
hmm
with someone. So again, we just want to raise that awareness and really normalize having conversations about it and normalizing having conversations um, within our churches
Yeah.
about it because it's happening in our churches, outside of our churches, it's
hmm
happening everywhere.
Yes.
Okay. So, what would you say in the studying that you've done and the experience that you've had and the research that's out there? What is the most common drug abused?
So the most common drug abuse is actually alcohol. I know a lot of people don't consider alcohol a drug, but it is in the field of addictions. Anywhere from 40 to 60% of alcohol addictions come from genetics.
Okay.
So, like we were saying, how it is huge right now everywhere, it also affects like friends and families and things like that. So, even if you might not meet someone that has an addiction, you might meet a family member or friend of someone that does.
And I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that alcohol is probably one of the most socially accepted things
Mhm.
as well, because people
Absolutely.
have wine at dinner
Mhm.
or maybe a mixed drink during happy hour
Mhm.
or during a celebratory event or during a sporting event. So it's very widely
Mhm.
accepted. And so to hear that it's also one of the most frequently abused drugs, that is not surprising when you think about how
Right.
socially acceptable
Right.
it is. Wow, okay. What are some other different types of addictions? Because I think sometimes when people think of addictions,
Yeah.
they think of certain drugs and that's it. But what are some other types of addictions in addition to drug addictions?
Yes. So there are many different types. Obviously, like you said, alcohol, illicit drugs, and things like that. But there's also gambling, shopping, social media, I would say is really huge right now as well. Pornography, the list goes on. Any type of addiction, they all kind of affect the same reward circuits in your brain.
Mhm.
So naturally, as humans, if we discover something that, makes us feel good, we tend to want to continue to do that.
So back up, I like what you said. All those addictions, the one thing that they have in common is that they trigger the same
Mhm.
reward area
Mhm.
in our brain. And so triggering that reward area means that I'm more inclined to want to do it again
Right.
because I get this positive feel
Mhm.
or positive something from doing it.
Yep.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Mhm.
amazing how we're wired, um, and the propensity to keep doing something because there is, on some level, at least in the beginning, a reward for something,
Right.
right? Because if we don't get some type of payoff for any behavior that we
Mhm.
do, eventually we'll stop doing it.
Right.
But when there's a payoff for our behavior, even if it's maladaptive, even if it's
Mhm.
addictive, we'll
Mhm.
keep doing it because we're getting something out of it.
Right. I
Wow.
do like to relate it to, or like an analogy is, we're all taught growing up, you touch the hot stove, it's hot.
Right.
So it's similar to that, if, you do this, you get this result.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's amazing. So now I know with addictions, there's certain stigmas associated with
Mhm.
addictions. And one of the things that I've heard, there's this battle, or it used to be, and anyway, when did some studies
Mhm.
between addictions being a disease versus a choice.
Mhm.
It's kind of like that nature versus nurture.
Exactly.
What is your take on that in your professional opinion and in the research? What is the
Yeah.
latest research saying?
So the research right now is that it is proven to be a disease or a disorder. Like I mentioned before, it does affect your structure and function of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what kind of takes it into that route.
Okay.
With it affecting your reward systems and things like that, it also affects your ability to make like rational decisions. Like anything else, like heart disease or other type of diseases, it targets one thing. So with heart disease, it targets your heart.
Mm-hmm.
With the disease of addiction, it targets your brain.
Wow.
So like we mentioned, it kind of gives you that motivation to keep doing the same thing over and over again. Definitely would agree that your first initial time to use or
Mm-hmm.
drink is your choice. And most people do know the risks of it, but they continue to try it anyway. Um, Although that's your choice, I don't think that you choose to be addicted.
Okay.
It can definitely, like I said, take you down that path. But I
Yeah.
don't think anyone chooses that life for themselves.
And I think that clarifies a lot when you recognize that it's a disease and that there's actually physiological effects or impacts
Mhm.
on the brain. And again, we're not absolving people of accountability and
Right.
responsibility, but I think it puts it in the context where people that are struggling with addictions, it's not as simple as just stop doing that.
Mhm.
Don't do that anymore. Like we tell
Mhm.
our child, don't pick up that cookie and eat that
Mhm.
cookie before dinner. Just don't do it. So we expect that child to listen to us
Yeah.
because we said it.
Right.
And in our rational brain and our rational mind, it makes sense.
Mhm.
But for someone that is struggling with making those rational choices or
Right.
decisions and has and are having the reward centers of their brain impacted,
Mhm.
it's a little bit more complex than saying, just stop doing that, okay?
Yeah.
It's hurting us. It's hurting the family. It's hurting you. So
Mhm.
please stop doing it.
And I've had so many experiences, so many with clients and patients that I've worked with that they actually come to me and they're like, "Why can't I stop? I
Hmm.
don't want to do this anymore, but I just can't stop." And it's really heartbreaking
Hmm.
to experience, and, I can definitely see why there would be stigma around it, and if you're someone that's never gone through it or really have experience or know what it is.
Right. And I think there's, along with the stigma of shame and guilt.
Mhm.
And so anytime there's shame associated with something
Mhm.
or someone's actions or behaviors, we have this tendency to want to hide it
Yeah.
or to minimize it
Mhm.
or to not speak about it because we feel ashamed. And
Yeah.
so if I don't talk about it, then maybe it's not that bad. Or
Right.
if I don't talk about it, then I don't really have to let someone know how much I'm struggling.
Yeah.
If I don't talk about it, maybe I can ignore it and maybe it's not that
Mhm.
bad. Um, and so shame and guilt, again, just happens and breeds, I think, silence.
It does.
And shame breeds more shame
I agree.
and more silence, which breeds isolation.
Mhm.
And you just go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And it's so many different layers. And so, again, what we want to do is begin to peel back some of those
Yeah.
layers, begin to break the silence, to
Mhm.
begin to break the stigmas
Mhm.
associated with this and saying, hey, if you're not affected by it, you know someone that is.
Right.
And so, this is something that needs to be talked about and brought to the surface in our Christian realms,
Yeah.
right? Because just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I might not struggle with some level of
Mhm.
addiction,
Mhm.
right? But if I have shame associated with, I'm supposed to be this good Christian,
Right.
I'm not supposed to have an addiction,
Mhm.
I'm not supposed to need help in this area. And then again, that silence
Mhm.
is being breeded or bred, whatever
Yeah.
correct pronunciation that's supposed to be. And so, in your time that you've worked in addictions, I think you said it's been about 4 years
Mhm.
total. Is there a common stereotype that seems to come to mind to people when they think of someone in addictions, like what that person looks like, maybe their age, what they're addicted to? Is there a common stereotype that comes to mind usually?
Absolutely. I would say the most common that I do see is when people do think of an addict per se or an alcoholic, they might picture heroin immediately. They might picture someone that's homeless, a criminal, those kind of things. But that's why I think it's important to bring to light because that's not always the case. If anything, the most common population I do work with are the people that have 9 to 5 jobs. They are the people that have families that are some might be in the church, like you said, and don't know how to talk about it or get
Hmm.
help. It is everybody. It's not just one type of group or community or things like that. It doesn't discriminate.
And I think that's important to educate ourselves on addictions doesn't have a typical face.
Right.
Like you said, it could be that person that lives in what we would consider a really nice neighborhood,
Mhm.
has a really nice job,
Yeah.
or is that stay at home mom or stay at home dad
Yeah.
nowadays, or is very functioning in the community,
Yeah.
but yet behind closed doors are struggling with whatever that
Yeah.
addiction
And
might be.
we do talk about that a lot, I would say, in like group settings and things like that in the practice. Because I work with people from everywhere. So I might have a client right now who, grew up with quote unquote the best childhood. He was raised in the church,
Hmm.
went to college, always had money in the family, and he ended up in rehab. But he's also sitting next to someone in rehab that might be 60 years old, grew up from poverty, didn't have family in his life, and that kind of thing. But realizing that no matter what journey you took to get there, you still got there and you're still
Yeah.
with those people together.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that is just so important to realize as people in the community, in the body of Christ,
Hmm.
that, like you said earlier, addictions doesn't discriminate.
Right.
Because if we have that view going in, I think we'll be more open minded, maybe be less
Hmm.
judgmental
Yeah.
because we're thinking addictions is going to look like the person on the street corner holding a sign, begging for food or begging for money,
Right.
or missing teeth or,
Yeah.
you know, looking very unkempt. And
Hmm.
we think, oh, that's the face of addiction. So it doesn't happen here,
Right.
doesn't happen in our circles, but it does. And
Yeah.
we have to begin to take our head out of the sand and be people of compassion
Mhm.
and people of understanding.
And I know that that can be hard and require courage sometimes from a lot of
Mhm.
people. I've also had to, I guess, kind of end that stigma sometimes with my own family and friends working in the field. I used to work in housing or like
Mhm.
halfway housing, if you will, where I worked inside the home with 8 to 10 men. Men or males are the main population that I've worked with so
Okay.
far. And I've had family, say like, be careful or, you need to be vigilant while you're at work. And I'm like, they're good people at the end of the day. I've never feared for my life or had any experience like that to feel that way.
Mhm.
I've met so many people through my work that are kinder to me than people that I might have met out in the world or in
Yeah.
the community that, might have those stigmas towards that population. So
Right.
it's very difficult sometimes seeing it from all different perspectives, especially, as a Christian. Um, and things like that. It's just it kinda comes from all angles too.
You know what, Kayla? I agree with you because I worked at my previous job at the Life Crisis Center for about 17 years. And sometimes some of the clients that I would see,
Mhm,
they were in recovery
mhm.
and had some years or months under their belt. And they were some of the most, I mean, maybe this is a stereotype, but they were some of the most real people,
Yeah,
and they just wanted me to give it to them honestly,
yeah,
compassionately, but honestly.
mhm,
They wanted the truth. They didn't want me to sugarcoat it. They wanted me to tell it like it was.
mhm.
And because their life at that point, because they're in recovery, their life was pretty much this open book.
Yeah,
They were trying to be very open and honest and vulnerable because they recognized what happens when they're not open
yeah,
and honest, and what
yeah,
happens when they begin to hide
mhm.
and slip into that addictive
Yeah,
behavior.
exactly.
And so at the point that I would see them again, a lot of times they had so many years or months already under their belt of
Mhm.
recovery, and this was just part of their lifestyle, living life with an open book because
Honesty.
they wanted to change, and
Yeah.
with honesty,
Mhm,
because their life and addiction was just the opposite, a lot of
mhm.
dishonesty.
Yeah,
But you're right, the people were from all walks of life. And I think that is the advantage that we have working in the helping profession,
mhm,
is that we see people at their best
mhm.
and we see people at their worst.
Yeah,
And we're privileged to be able to hold space for
mhm.
those individuals in their good times and
And
in
they're
their not
bad.
so good times, in
Mhm,
their bad times. And, that's very humbling. And I think so for you or I, our eyes are more open to
mhm.
know that anyone can be impacted.
Yeah,
Nobody is excluded
right.
from this. Any of us could try something once thinking like, oh, I'm just taking this to just relax.
Mhm,
And like you said earlier, maybe because how our brain's wired genetically,
mhm.
we could be hooked
Yeah,
after one time. And
yeah,
that wasn't our intention,
right.
but it was to relax or to unwind or,
Mhm,
whatever it might be. And so I think being in this field has helped me become more compassionate and open to the plight of people,
mhm.
because we see that these problems, traumas, addictions, they don't discriminate.
Right.
They don't come from a certain zip code,
Yeah.
right? So, one of these questions, I think I already asked, but some of the common questions that either people going through addictions ask themselves or maybe their loved ones ask. And one of them, I think you said that people say, why can't I just stop?
Right.
What's another question that people maybe ask of themselves, or other people might pose a question about their loved one in addictions? Can you think of anything that maybe you've heard? I know
Mhm.
that why can't I stop, or why can't you just stop? Don't you love me, or don't you care about me anymore?
Yeah.
Some people sometimes question their faith?
I do think a lot of people question faith. I've met clients that have never met oh gosh, never had
Excuse me.
faith before
Hmm. Hmm.
and are kind of dis what's the word I'm looking for? Discouraged from
Discouraged.
finding faith
Okay.
because of the stigma around their addiction.
Hmm.
That's why I think it's important within the church and the community, like we're talking about tonight, is spreading awareness and learning how to approach those that may need help, that we can start the conversation and make them feel more welcome to find that faith that we
Okay.
may share.
Yeah.
Um, Back to the guilt and shame, like we were talking about, um, there may be people that struggle with substance abuse that don't think that they're worthy of God's love, that they don't think that they're worthy to step into the church because of what they've done. And at the end of the day, I would say those struggling, they know themselves more than anyone, and they know the things that they've done more than anyone.
Okay.
So even with judgment that might be posed to them, most of the time they already know.
Okay.
We don't always have to remind them, hey, you did this, or you're not a good mom, or, just stop, and that kind of thing, when that just brings on more of the shame.
Because they already kind of are already struggling with that for themselves.
Yeah.
And so we don't necessarily need to remind them of their
Right.
faults and what they're not doing and
Yeah.
what they should be doing. And
Yeah.
because that doesn't really help with shame and guilt to say, oh, well, Kayla, you shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
That doesn't really make you feel better.
Yeah.
It doesn't prompt you to want to stop doing whatever it is that you might be doing. And I think one of the things that you and I talked about before, that sometimes people may say, well, why is God allowing this to happen? Whether it's, that secondary victim that we refer to, like maybe their son or daughter is in addictions, or their loved one, and that family member saying, why is God allowing this? And that's a difficult question to unpack, because that's a question that many people have about suffering, about loss, about death. Like, why is God allowing this? And, and you can maybe add to this, but one of the things that I think of is, one, there's so much suffering and going on because of sin and the fall back to Genesis. And so we live in a broken and fallen world. That was not God's original design or intent for us.
Right.
But because of sin, we do live in a fallen world. And I know something you said earlier, that initially, we make choices about, whether we want to hang out with this group of people, or whether we want to do X, Y, or Z. And so a lot of times we have to say, God is sovereign, and God does allow some things. God does stop certain things.
Yeah.
And that's just such a huge question to unpack. But God does desire the best for us.
Absolutely.
Whether it's you, me, whether it's someone in addictions, not in addictions, like He desires the best for us. He desires that we have a relationship with Him. He desires that we bring all of our junk to Him, whatever that junk is. Some people maybe have a backpack of junk. Mine's a little bit bigger than a backpack. Some people have a trunk. I might have a trunk.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, how big or small, I think God wants us to bring it all to Him.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Like you said, God does give us free will. He does give us choice. And like you said, with the world, there is temptation, and that might look different for everyone. And everyone's sin's going to look different. But at the end of the day, we aren't the ones to say how big or small.
Exactly.
We aren't the ones, like you were saying, with the trunk or the backpack. It's not up to us to decide what sin's greater than the other, because at the end of the day, they're the same.
Exactly. So I think sometimes as believers, sometimes we focus on asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
We focus, and I think we mean well. Like, I don't have a heaven or a hell to put you in, Kayla. Right? So my questions then aren't going to be, well, Kayla, you're going to hell, you're going to, or you're not going. I don't have a heaven or hell to put you in or anybody else in. So maybe the questions and the things that we need to ask are to be different.
Yeah.
And so my next question is, well, then we're talking about this within a space that is spiritually based, right? So as a body of believers, as the big church, how can we as the church, Big C church, how can we support people that are struggling in addictions? How can we be there for people that maybe have loved ones in addictions?
I would definitely encourage finding that courage to begin conversations. If you have a loved one, maybe don't feel that embarrassment. You know what I mean? And honestly, the other night I was thinking a lot about this podcast. When you asked me to come on, I was like, yes, I'm so excited. And I was like, oh gosh, I got to speak in front of people. The night before last, I felt like God actually woke me up in the middle of the night and was like, I know what you should say. And I was like, oh yeah, what's that? I'm scared. And he was like, friendship. And I was like, okay. And I started to realize that it's friendship. Even though that person might be your mother, be their friend. It might be your dad. It might be your child. Just be their friend.
Yeah. Just be there for them.
Yeah.
So it's the power of presence.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, that I want to fix it.
Yeah.
I want to make it better.
Yeah.
And there's some things I can't fix.
Nope.
Or it's not my job to fix, but I can be a presence.
Mm-hmm.
I can be a friend. I can be there. I can listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that you talked about earlier is being non-judgmental.
Yeah.
Because again, we don't have a heaven or hell to put people in.
Mm-hmm.
We can share the love of Christ. We can share and be the light.
Yeah.
Right? We can point people to resources too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, everyone's recovery is different.
Yep.
Right? And you said this the other night when we were talking, that everyone's addiction is different and everyone's road to recovery is different. And there are some people that maybe as soon as they came to Christ and the minute they accepted Christ, they never did whatever that addiction was
Yep.
again. And that is powerful and that is wonderful and that is real. And then there are some that they get saved, they love the Lord, they accept the Lord, they go to small group, they're in community, and they're still struggling.
Yeah.
And it's a progressive walk with them. And
Yeah.
that's real. It doesn't mean that they're not saved. It doesn't mean that God's not with them. It's just their recovery and their journey looks different. Maybe
Yeah.
they have to go to NA groups and AA groups.
Exactly.
Or celebrate recovery groups. Yeah. And that is okay because everybody's recovery is going to look different.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful because sometimes, and again, I think we mean well, but I think sometimes we try to make solutions a one size fits all. And it doesn't work like that.
And like you said, we have to remember that, especially if you do have a loved one, we can't save them.
Exactly.
Only Jesus saves.
Exactly.
We can provide that support and the resources, and I think that's what we should be doing instead of maybe turning the blind eye and things like that. Invite your friend to church. Invite, you heard your friend's friend is struggling. Invite them to church.
Right.
They might say no, and that's okay.
Invite them to small group.
Right.
Right? On Monday nights.
On Monday nights. Come see us.
On Monday nights.
But yes, just being open and vulnerable, which can be very hard to do. I think that's my biggest advice would be take that courage and that step out and try to help somebody.
And I would say, which is kind of piggybacking off what you said, let's not beat people up with the Bible.
Yeah.
Let's not weaponize the Bible.
Yeah.
Let's not demonize the Bible and like it becomes this hammer because that doesn't do anyone any good. Like you said, when I'm going through something, I already feel bad about myself.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean that we don't give people truth and honesty.
Right.
But we give individuals truth with grace and love.
Correct.
So our conversations are full of grace and seasoned with salt. A lot of times our conversations are not seasoned with salt. And they're like, sandpaper.
Yeah.
And, that makes people get defensive.
Absolutely.
Right? That makes people want to shut down. And we want to be inviting. And if you don't know what to say, again, sometimes it's the power of presence or inviting them to a Celebrate Recovery.
Yeah.
Or agreeing to say, hey, I'll drive you to your NA meeting.
Right.
Or if you're, I remember I had this friend like, okay, if you can't drive, no, I don't want you drinking, but if you're going to, please call me and I will come pick you up.
Right.
Right. So that's not my time to judge. Like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. No, because they're going to make that decision or choice
regardless,
whether I want to or not.
Right.
But what I can do is like, you know what? I can come pick you up or give me a call.
Yeah.
Right. It's that power of presence and being with someone in the moment. That can sometimes mean we have to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty a little bit, so to say, right? Because discipleship doesn't always look easy, doesn't always look fun, isn't always, just rainbows and roses. It's hard work.
It is.
But that's, as believers, that's what we're tasked to do, to walk alongside people, to encourage them, to be lights, to give them hope. And then as we built a relationship, that friendship, then you're more inclined, if I begin to introduce the word, you're more inclined to listen because I've driven you to NA meetings before, or I've picked you up when you're down, or I've sat over your house and, we've talked for half an hour. And so now when I talk about a scripture, your ear is more inclined to listen.
And that trust is formed.
Exactly. That trust is formed. So being willing to have the conversations. And one thing I put down here, I made notes so I wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
Avoiding minimization. Because I think sometimes we can minimize the impact of it. Oh, they only get drunk on the weekends.
Right.
or they're only getting high on the weekends where
Yeah.
we're minimizing it.
Yeah.
Or I'm sure they could stop whenever they want. Or maybe the addict is saying that themselves, I can stop whenever I want. So maybe they minimize it themselves. And I think the way that I can be a support is to not minimize it,
Right.
right? Because it could be detrimental to your safety, to your family's safety.
Yeah.
Because what we know about traumas and addictions, it doesn't just affect the person that's going through it. It affects family, friends,
Yeah.
coworkers, community. It's far, far reaching. So I say not to minimize it and to not bury our heads in the sand.
Yeah.
Right? It's happening around us,
Yeah.
right? The person next to me in church or behind me could be going through something. And I can't act like, oh, this doesn't happen at our church.
Right.
This doesn't happen at your church. Yeah. And I love that we, at our church here, I love that we have our small groups and that one of the small groups is celebrate recovery.
Yeah.
So that individuals can talk amongst other individuals about what it's like to be addicted to whatever the addiction is.
Yeah.
It's not bound to just one particular
Exactly.
addiction. So I think having those conversations and then having those services available, if possible, resources within your local assembly.
Yeah.
Or maybe if that's not your calling, so to say, maybe partnering with another church that they do have a group where you can, send people their way or
Yeah.
you can work together and collaborate. Because it doesn't matter who does the work as long as the work gets done.
Yeah.
Right?
And
As long
really
as
coming together as a community to do that.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be, all one person or just the counselor, just the pastor.
Right, exactly.
Even me being in the field, I don't have all the answers. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I still learn every day and probably will the rest of the time that I'm there.
Yeah, and that's for any of us
Yeah.
in any field, but especially in the helping professions.
Yeah.
We have to recognize what our limits are or boundaries, or we'll be burnt out. That might be another
Yeah.
podcast on burnt out, right? Being burnt out.
Yes, that would be big.
But that is so true. As helpers, we have to recognize our boundaries. And I think that flows into my next question with how can family members or friends support their loved one who's in addiction?
Yeah. So we definitely, I would say, see that a lot, or that being part of the stigma is, like I mentioned earlier, with like the criminal behavior and stuff, there are behaviors that come around for addiction, but like we said earlier, everyone's addiction recovery looks different. So not everyone, steals, not everyone does this and that. Some families might have experienced that though and are kind of standoffish of, we're cutting you out, or it can also go the other way of enabling as well. So I think having healthy boundaries from either perspective is really important, because we don't want to enable someone to where they feel like they don't need to get better.
Exactly. And that kind of goes along with what I had down here is setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of times, especially for a parent, we want to fix our kids.
Exactly.
We want to fix our loved ones. And it's not our job, like we said earlier.
Yeah.
We aren't God and we're not the Holy Spirit, right? And so if our loved ones are saved, we're praying that the Holy Spirit will continually to woo them and to help them and point them in the direction where they need help or put people in their life that need help.
Yeah.
And if they're not saved, we pray that our loved ones, will find Christ and that they will look to God and look to their faith as a strength for them and as another community that they can go to for support. And I think recognizing kind of the same thing, that we have limits. I remember this individual that I knew a few years back, and his loved one, child was in addiction, adult child was in addiction, did not stay with them,
Right.
but would often roam the streets and kind of couch surf, I guess is the terminology. And so in order to help her but not enable, whenever this person needed money, they wouldn't give money,
Right.
but they would buy food.
Yeah.
Or they would leave food on the deck or on the porch or leave it accessible to the person.
Right.
And I just thought that was an excellent example. Again, this worked for them.
Right.
And everyone has to find what boundaries work for them and their family.
Yeah.
But this seemed to work for them,
Yeah.
setting the boundaries, buying food or helping with the bill, but not giving them cash because that was too much of a temptation to utilize the money on drugs.
And setting boundaries is extremely difficult, like you said, especially maybe for a parent or someone that is, used to giving and helping and trying
Mhm.
to do the saving thing and things like that, and realizing that it just isn't working because it
Exactly.
isn't in their hands to do.
Exactly.
And like you said, it will look different for everyone. But I think through my experience with learning about boundaries with my clients and their own families is not alienating them so much to the point
Mhm.
of them wanting to stay in the addiction.
Okay.
So you might not necessarily have to like see them every day or, give them money or be able to provide physical world things, but letting them know, like, I still love you.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry that you're struggling, but I can't do anything for you right now, but I
Yeah.
still love you.
And I think sometimes people term that tough love. I don't know if they still call it that anymore. And sometimes that is hard because it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it's enough. But I think it's part of, and I think Pastor Mark preached about this in one of his sermons a few Sundays ago, is that we have to learn
Yeah.
to let go of things that we're not in control of.
Mhm.
And letting go of this means I'm grasping a hold of something else, which
Right.
would be my faith in God or my trust
Mhm.
in God, and trusting that God, you gave me this son or daughter or this family member, and I'm entrusting them to you.
Yeah.
Give me and show me the wisdom of what to do, how to do, what not to say, what to say, when to say it, or surround me with community.
Mhm.
Because I think, again, what we call secondary, they need their community as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, is it the Al-Anon? That's
Yes.
for like family and
Yeah.
friends of
Mhm.
people struggling with addictions.
Yeah,
So they need their space also
for sure.
so that they can come in contact with other people that are going through similar things. That power of community
Community.
again,
Mhm.
power of community. Kayla, what would you say to someone that might be listening into this podcast and they're struggling with knowing, do I have an addiction problem? Or is it something I really can control? Is there any insight or advice that you would give them as to what their next step should be, if anything, if they're kind of on the fence?
Yeah. I would say that, try not to be afraid.
Okay.
It's okay to maybe go into, a different facility and be like, "Hey, I think I'm struggling with this. What do you think?" You might have to sit down and have an assessment done
Okay.
and work it out with whatever clinician is maybe helping you. I think that would be the best way. But sometimes if you just feel it in your heart and you're moved that, the habit is something that isn't working for you or you're seeing detriments in your life
Mm,
due to this substance or this
okay.
habit or this behavior, it would be a good sign that maybe you can't do it alone.
Okay.
And it's okay to reach out, even if it isn't necessarily to a facility, but maybe a friend
Okay.
or a family member. But you don't have to sit in that alone or be
S-
embarrassed, like we were saying.
So make that initial step, whether
Yeah.
it's to a family member, a friend,
Yeah.
or it's professional help. If it's professional help, it sounds like it would take the form of an assessment
Yes.
where they will ask you a series of questions.
Mhm.
You give them information. They will probably ask you about substances that you've
Mhm.
used, for how long, how much,
Yep.
how it affects you, and things like that.
Mhm.
And if you're not sure if it's to that level, then it might be talking to a friend or a
Right.
trusted loved one.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, have that person examine how detrimental the substance that they're thinking, whether or not they're abusing or not,
Yeah.
how detrimental this has been in their life.
Right.
So, for example, have they lost time from work?
Exactly.
Are they chronically late to work or leaving early?
Mhm.
Have a lot of sick days that really
Mhm.
can't be accounted for, like the flu or
Right.
things like that. Spending exorbitant amounts of money or monies that you don't have,
Yeah.
or maybe taking your kids' money from their piggy bank, or
Mhm.
things that you might feel ashamed about, but it's important to kind of turn that mirror and begin to ask yourself these
Yeah.
things. Are my relationships impacted? Maybe my
That's a
wife
big
or
one.
girlfriend or husband, are we getting into arguments? Am
Yeah.
I blacking out, losing time?
Mhm.
So many different things that I would imagine that they would have to begin to say, how is my present day functioning being impacted?
Yes.
And I think we can look at that on a spectrum from mildly
Mhm.
impacted to extremely
Absolutely.
impacted.
And I do believe that certain behaviors can be caught early
Mhm.
enough to
Okay.
where they can be, changed or helped. There's, like you said, a scale. You have maybe use, misuse, and then substance
Mm.
abuse and
Okay.
dependence.
Okay.
Sometimes, even if your body isn't physically dependent, it could still be abused.
Okay. So again, there's a lot of different levels to this, and they may need help sorting it out.
Yeah.
And if so, that's okay.
Right.
Right? So again, we want to normalize this. We don't expect the individuals that are on the fence to have the answers to their questions, so to
Yeah.
say. Sometimes my questions prompt more questions.
Yeah.
And if that happens, that's totally okay. And I think as a body of believers, if people come to us with questions, we don't have to feel like we have to have all the answers.
Right.
Sometimes it's pointing them in the right direction.
Exactly.
Or say, hey, you know what? My friend Kayla, she works at White Flint.
Yeah.
Let me give her a call, or let's make that phone call together, or let's go down to, where her office is located together, or maybe it's an Al-Anon meeting or an NA meeting.
Right.
So again, you don't have to go it alone.
Right. And
right?
it's nothing to feel pressured on
Okay.
either. I would say it's your decision, your choice. If you were to go maybe get an evaluation or something, you don't have to feel pressured to join treatment.
Okay.
Once you get there, they might recommend you, but you can say no.
It's still, they still have choice.
Right.
Okay.
That's not taken from you.
Okay. Well, Kayla, this has been very enlightening, very eye-opening. And again, just having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that someone has heard something in this dialogue between us that will prompt them to take a next step, whatever that may look like, whether it's the person struggling with addiction or whether it's the loved one that's supporting someone in addiction,
Right.
that this will prompt them to say, hey, what's the next step that I need to take?
Because it reaches everyone. And I would say the biggest takeaway would be to just remember that as we are children of God, people that may be in substance abuse, they're also a child of God as well.
Exactly.
And we're all in this together.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
And no one is better than anyone else. God loves us all.
Right.
And his grace and mercy is available in abundance to all of us.
Yeah.
Right? And for those of us that are believers that know Christ, and one of the things that I want to really drive home is that, when God looked at the people that were without a leader and lost, he looked upon them with compassion.
Right.
Right? And so as believers, we're supposed to follow Christ's example. Then we're to look to people and look on people with compassion and with love.
Absolutely.
Not with judgmental stares and eyes and talking about them, but not willing to lend a hand or a prayer, whatever that help may look like. So I really appreciate you coming on. And hopefully this will be the first of many conversations here on the podcast. I want to thank you so much for taking your time out and joining me. Guys, this has been an awesome time. And again, if something has been said or done that has sparked you to want to take that next step or to get more information, we're going to have some resources linked into this podcast, some national resources to places like Al-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcohol Anonymous, SAMHSA, which is a national website for a lot of resources for mental health and substance. So we'll link those in at the end of the podcast. So again, you don't have to go through this alone. You are surrounded with love and the light of Christ and the love of Christ. So please reach out if you need help or if you want information. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.